So welcome back, Jeff.
Thanks. Kill myself on this thing. As Tom said, typically the goal of this session is to bring the day together, but since I speak Swedish, that would have been difficult. So instead, here's the plan for the next 20-25 minutes. I'm going to tell you a story. The story is titled, How I Learned to Win a Presidential Election. The story is going to take 7.5 minutes to tell. How do I know it's going to take 7.5 minutes to tell? Because this is a lightning talk that I gave a couple weeks ago in Boston. And so every slide is 30 seconds, every slide moves forward by itself, and there are 15 slides. So it's going to be 7.5 minutes, and I'm going to try to get through it without screwing it up. That's the plan. I've given this talk one time before, let's see how it goes. Afterwards, the final slide has a couple of themes that resonate both from this talk as well as from the opening keynote this morning. And what I'd love to take is to get your take on some of those themes, what challenges you've seen to those, what stuff maybe you've heard today that's informed those themes, and we can kind of carry that conversation through here to mingle as we go over from that. So that's the plan for the next few minutes, and we'll get started with this now. So I'm going to tell you a story about how to win a presidential election, but we're not going to talk about, in the United States, but we're not going to talk about 2016, we're not going to touch 2016. We're going to talk about 2012, a kinder, gentler year in the United States, where these were our two candidates. We've got Barack Obama, and this is a guy named Mitt Romney. Now, as it turns out, in the United States, presidential campaigns are, in the software business, the same as you are. Now, why do I say that presidential campaigns are in the software business? Well, because in the United States, the only way to win a presidential election is to get out the vote. Now, what that means is that you have to go and get people out of their homes and get them to the polls to vote. So the way that you do that is with technology, with staff. And we're talking about tens of thousands of volunteers that go to states and literally knock on doors. And the way that you manage that staff is with technology. Use the technology to coordinate them and to raise money and to make sure that everything's happening correctly. Now, the Obama team built this software system in 2008 called Houdini, and it didn't work very well for them. It's kind of a big bang release. So in 2012, they built a system called Narwhal. The way that they built the system was they used modern Silicon Valley software tactics. They hired one cross-functional team, they housed them all in Chicago, and that team worked together for a year, launching early and iterating on the product to understand how to build this system. Now, the Romney campaign also built a system. They built a system called Orca. Why? Because orcas are narwhals. They built their system in a very traditional, Romney was a management consultant, and so they built it that management consulting way. They had a big build, they outsourced it to various firms, they were going to do a big bang release on election day, they were going to host everything in one spot, and they were so confident that they were going to win this election. They went on TV and bragged about this system. Right? At 5 o'clock, when the exit polls come out, we won't pay any attention to it because we will have much more scientific information. The system was going to give them the answer to the election well in advance. Right? And the whole political operation that they were building was software-based, which is pretty amazing, a sense of confidence for a system that's going to be released on election day. Well, so the Obama campaign starts building their software. Obama's wondering how things are going, and the team says, hey, the early releases are confusing to people. They can't figure it out. They can't use it. They failed to build something that customers can use. How did we find this out? We found out by actually showing it to them. Right? We showed the system to customers. And when did we find this out? Well, we found out in the first month. Well, that's great. That means we have 11 more months to figure this out. Right? Now, on the Romney side, they're wondering, hey, how are things going over at the Romney side? Well, we're building the software in our ultra-secure data center, right? We're confident that it's going to work, and we're confident that when we launch it, it's going to be the best. Oh, and by the way, all those various vendors that we contracted out to will be delivering their separate parts of the system just before election day. So we're super confident about this, but the reality is that we have actually tested it. So back to the Obama side. Obama's wondering how things are going. He says, hey, will the system actually scale on election day, right? We've got to launch it out to everybody. Well, the team says we're confident it will scale because we've been playing war games with it for months. Every month, we pretend it's election day, one day of the month. We throw everything we have at the system. It crashes. We figure out how to get it back up and running. And we're doing all of this on Amazon Web Services, which is our actual production environment, testing and improving continuously using DevOps techniques. Well, election day comes, and the night before election day, the Romney campaign emails PDFs to their staff about how to use this system on their smartphone. Except a large percentage of the staff can't figure out even how to open the PDFs. And a larger percentage of those folks don't even own a smartphone. And on the day of, the system, for those who could access the system ends up crashing on election day because the data center can't stand up to the demand of those folks who can actually access the system itself. And as it turns out, on the Obama side, well, can the volunteers figure out how to use the system? Well, they couldn't at first, but today, on election day, 12 months later, 12 months of iterations and learning and continuous improvement, 12 months of sensing what was working and what wasn't, and responding, right? It's better now. It's shake and bake time. We're old pals, and we can get it to work, right? So the teams go out, and they run election day, and well, election night, turns out, we know what happened on election night. Romney lost, Obama won, right? And can you credit Orca as the reason that Romney lost for failing to get out the vote? Maybe, but the real lesson is that Orca is an important example of the wrong way to be in the software business. Outsourced teams, big bang launches, and careful plans with giant Gantt charts. Right? The old way of integrating software into your business is no longer a viable way to operate. In fact, sensing and responding is modern business operations. Business operations, right? You're in the software business, it's eating the world, it consumes presidential campaigns and everything else. And managing a software-based business is different because software has a level of uncertainty in it that physical products don't. We have to manage and accept that uncertainty, that you're going to be wrong until you're right. And our goal is to figure out where we're right and where we're wrong as soon as possible. And that's kind of the benefit of sensing regularly, right? Sensing takes many forms. It's the beginning of that feedback loop. It's about knowing that whatever you plan, reality is likely to be different. You're looking at things like user research to learn, online reviews, analytics, and customer conversations to build a picture of what that reality is, which ultimately ends up being more accurate than any plan that we make in advance. And once we sense that data and we collect it, we have to create an environment where responding is okay. But it has to be okay to experiment. Structure our teams so that they have the people to respond and the culture that says go learn something, and they use that information to make real game time decisions, right? Adjusting course as new information comes in, and continuously improve the service to build more successful customers, and then ultimately more successful businesses, or in the case of 2012, more successful presidential campaigns. And so this is where this all nets out in the 4 principles of sense and respond. First and foremost, again, I know a lot of you feel like you know this, but the reality is that you're in the software business, and that managing software is different. It's not the same as managing industrial manufacturing, so we need new types of organizations and new types of teams that can build cultures and structures and processes that encourage continuous learning and continuous improvement. Thank you. So that's how you win a presidential election in the U.S. And hopefully that was good. I enjoyed telling you that story. And that's a true story about Orca and Narwhal and those systems and how they competed to build better systems, and ultimately just using modern tactics, the Obama campaign simply built a more usable, more successful system. And certainly helped edge the race out for it in some states. Right? We'll see how things play out this year. Hopefully a little better. So with that, looking at these themes up here today, some of the stuff you've heard throughout the day, things that I said this morning perhaps, have you heard things, and I'd be curious to get your take on this stuff. Do you believe this? Have you heard things today that would support some of these ideas, that would inform some of them, perhaps contradict some of them? What are your thoughts on some of this stuff that you've heard today? Does anybody not think they're in the software business? That's good. Yes.
I think that one takeaway that was also in my session, the talks afterwards, we had a great conversation with a few of us regarding the shit umbrella.
Yeah.
And that a new organization is people who dare to step in on all levels, right? It doesn't just have to be management, to dare to experiment, to dare continuously. And that everyone needs to be a shit umbrella. And for hopefully one day it'll stop raining shit.
Right. I love that. I love it. Everyone needs to be a shit umbrella. Tweet that at some point today. That's really good. I mean, the problem is, you can tell me about the cultural differences in Sweden. In the United States, I mean, it really depends on the company, on a company-by-company basis. But in most situations, there is very little appetite for taking that risk. Because that's what it is, right? Sticking your neck out there and saying, hey, I'm going to do something different, something that's beyond my remit or beyond my job description or different than the way that I was told to do it, is risky for a lot of people. And in a lot of companies, that doesn't get rewarded. And so the question, so I kind of come back to you and say, is there, my impression of Sweden, I've been here a lot over the last few years, working with a variety of different companies, teaching some classes, talking to a lot of folks. My impression is that there is a more mature understanding here of the values behind the content that we covered today. Does that then reflect in the culture and the way that we work, in the way that you work? Yeah.
Just to give an example then from the, that term really stuck with me because our top shit umbrella at Telia is our Swedish CEO, Helene Barnekow, she's really the top shit umbrella. And she actually, the entire company is driven by a vision of 3 words: dare, care, simplify.
Yeah.
And that means that it's an encouragement to everyone to dare, but with care, and look for simplification. So that ties to me into a new organization and continuous learning. But for me, it really is, it's everyone's responsibility to be the shit umbrella. And maybe that's a cultural difference.
Well, I mean, so you've got, if you remember my Braveheart slide from this morning, right? There's that, when the leader of the business says it's okay and sets an example, it becomes a whole different story. Right? I'll tell you a quick anecdote. I'd love to hear from some other folks too how this manifests in your world as well. But I keep talking about this big bank. It's just my most recent experience in the last few months. Working with the executive team at this big bank, and they are trying to understand what Agile means for them. What does Agile mean for the president of a business unit that has 5,000 employees and makes $12 billion a year? Right? What does that mean for him on a day-to-day basis and his team? And so we were working with them to kind of bring some of the values and the principles into the way that they work. And one day after we had a meeting with him and his team, he went off to his direct reports meeting where he talks to the people who report directly into him. And he literally said 3 words. He said, Agile is hard. That was it. And people freaked out. They were like, oh my God, he understands it. Right? He finally sees the pain that we're going through. Right? maybe there's a hope here. And just that little bit of spark from leadership, right? That says, look, I have a bit of empathy, and now I understand what you're going through, goes a long way. What you're describing is 1,000 steps further along, which is here's how we're going to operate, and I'll be the shining example for that. But even that little bit of insight into I understand what's happening here, and I recognize that it's hard was huge. I heard about it from 100 different people in the organization saying, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because and it was 3 words, literally. Agile is hard. That was it. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I have some. My thoughts are about agile development more in general.
Yeah.
And when I see that so many teams and everything are talking about agile development and really preaching that, I sense a danger of some teams not properly doing a design for the future scaling of the project from the beginning with the excuse that this is agile development and we will fix that later on, we just need to get started and then we deal with the things later on.
Yeah.
And once that they start to look into improving the structure of it all, they have already gone quite far down a road which they maybe should not be on, and cause themselves additional pain.
Yeah.
Is that worry somehow warranted when you look at your experience and general knowledge of this?
Yeah, so let me react to that. Let me react to that by just prefacing really quick that I'm not a software engineer.
Okay.
But I've worked in software engineering teams and product development teams for 20 years. So I know what you're talking about, and I've been there. Let me say how I think about that process. So the way that I think about it, and I'm going to talk about things in an ideal state, and I've seen them play out sometimes in an ideal way, and sometimes they play out. But in an ideal state, especially for a system that needs this system or a product that needs to scale to a lot of users or a broad customer base, there is a high level of risk at the beginning of that initiative. And the way that I work with my teams and the way that I've worked with teams in the past is to sit with those teams and identify all of those risks up front. Right? Assumptions, the assumptions that we're making about this system. One of those assumptions is scale. Right? We will probably need to scale it. How are we going to scale it in a way that supports whatever it is that it needs to support? Right? Now, once we've got that list of risks, of assumptions that we think the project is going to be based on, the question that I then ask the team is, what's the most important thing that we need to learn first from that list of stuff we just laid out? Right? Rarely, I'm going to say rarely because I don't like to speak in absolutes, you never know, right? But rarely is the first thing the most important thing we need to learn first is, will it scale? Rarely, right? Usually it's, is there a need? How do we solve for it in a compelling way? How does it integrate into the existing workflow? How will it fit into the product portfolio? Yeah, things like that are up front. And so we start to run experiments and learning loops to figure out how to de-risk the most important, or the things that we think are the most important to learn first. At some point, we start to write code. Right? And as we begin to write code, we have to re-examine that list of priorities. At some point, the will it scale risk makes it to the top of the list. Right? But I think we prioritize that knowing that whenever we get to that, whatever we build up until then may have to get thrown away. Right? And so I think that if we go into that prioritization exercise, and that's a regular kind of re-grooming of that list as we learn more stuff, but if we go into that eyes open, I think that's the best way I've seen it handled. So yes, we've painted ourselves, I've been on teams that have painted themselves into a corner. We built a thing that will scale to 10,000 users, but not to 500,000. So we've had to throw away the 10,000 user prototype. But you know what? We learned so much from that we can then redeploy the system faster and more successfully to the 500,000 users who needed it. So that's how I think about that work. And I think that if you're honest with yourselves and your teams about everything that you need to learn, and when that scaling question comes in, I think that's been an effective way to handle it. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I was basically having in the back of my mind the memory of a project where management wasn't prepared to take care of the technical debt at a later point. And since that was the management's perception, in that case, it couldn't make sense to think about the scaling early on, because we were never allowed to go back and start from scratch, taking with us what we had learned. So this project continues to accumulate technical debt and move forward. And it's today moving at maybe 1/4 of the pace that it could be moving. And very painful for everybody involved, and large circulation of people involved. Nobody stays longer than 2 years in general.
Right. So all of those things should be warning signs, right? And somebody should be calling those out. But I think it speaks to the kind of the principle of transparency that I talked about this morning, right? I think that if we're, as the technical team, we need to be transparent to our colleagues and our management as well. Say, look, here are the choices that we're making today. We're making these choices today because this is the thing that we're trying to solve for immediately. Here's what we're deferring, right? We're deferring scalability, right? And if we get too far downstream on this, at some point we're going to have to cut over to a more scalable architecture, right? And as long as you're providing them with those facts along the way in a transparent way, in theory, there's an objective conversation about when to make the switch over to the more scalable architecture, right? That's about being very open and transparent and proactive in communicating the choices that we're making and explicit about why we're making these choices, right? We're not going to build a scalable model at the moment because actually what we're trying to prove out is that people can even use this thing, or that it's even worthwhile to build it, or that we can make money off it, or that we can sell it, or whatever it is, right? And if you can prove that we can sell it, that people like it, that this is our new big line of business, then let's invest in solving all the debt that we accumulated in that program.
And maybe also, it takes skill to not impose very much technical debt. I mean, technical debt is embedded, never. But it takes skill to not accumulate very much very fast. And not every team has that skill. And that's kind of the technical characteristics of Agile. Sometimes has less focus than the sort of process parts of Agile.
Agreed.
But then you also get into the problem. That you're actually accumulating very much technical debt, which maybe better skilled team would have been accumulated.
Right. Yeah, and I was going to suggest that ultimately teams learn that along the way, right? So if teams are developing, they're new to this way of working, to your point, they probably accumulate more debt than they need to. But as they get more mature, hopefully, that gets better. Any other thoughts or comments before we mingle? If you do have any thoughts or questions for me specifically after today, next week, next month, that's my email address right there. It's first name and last name.co. Because some guy in the Midwest in the United States has Gothelf.com. You don't know who he is. I saw his picture. He looks like he could be family. He looks like that. Reached out. In any case, thank you very much for having me here today. Don't hesitate to reach out and let's get a drink. Yeah.